The town sat between red earth roads and old mango trees, small enough that every footstep was known, yet large enough to hide secrets. Here, Christmas was not only a day of laughter and full plates. It was a mirror. On that day, the town showed people who they truly were. Kind hearts shone brighter. Greedy hearts grew heavy. Some smiled loudly, while their intentions stayed hidden like snakes in tall grass. Everyone knew this, even if no one said it aloud. As December winds arrived, elders became the quiet center of the town. Their words were not written, but they carried weight heavier than stone. Children were taught to greet elders first before greeting their friends. Women reminded one another that food tasted better when shared. Men were warned that pride invited trouble. The poor were not to be ignored, especially at Christmas. These rules lived in people's bones, passed down through stories told by firelight. Anyone who broke them might laugh today, but would cry tomorrow. At the heart of Christmas stood the rice. Not just any food, but Christmas rice. It carried memory. It carried prayer. In years of hunger, it had kept families alive. In years of plenty, it reminded them to give thanks. Elders said the ancestors listened when rice was cooked on Christmas Day. They said the steam carried words upward. Gratitude made the rice sweet. Pride made it bitter. Children were warned never to play near the pot, because the rice was listening. In a small house near the edge of the town lived a widow known more for her strength than her possessions. Her back was bent from years of labor, yet her eyes were steady. She farmed small land, washed clothes for others, and never begged. People respected her silence, though pity followed her like a shadow. She greeted everyone with calm dignity, even when her basket came back light from the market. At Christmas, she did not complain. She simply worked harder. Her children watched everything. Their stomachs often knew hunger, but their eyes held hope. They whispered about Christmas days past, when rice filled their bowls just enough to feel full. To them, that one pot meant laughter, warmth, and belonging. One evening, the youngest asked softly, "Mama, will the rice be ready on Christmas?" She paused, then smiled. "It will be ready," she said, though her hands trembled. Across the town stood a large house painted bright, with music that traveled far. The wealthy household prepared early, sacks of rice stacked high for everyone to see. In public, the owner spoke of generosity. "Christmas is about giving," he announced. People clapped. But behind closed doors, his voice changed. "Make sure they see our pot," he said. "Let them talk about us." His giving searched for praise, not peace. And somewhere between the widow's quiet fire and that loud house, the town's true test was already beginning. Eyes followed plates before they followed faces. In the days leading to Christmas, people greeted one another with smiles, but their glances were sharp. They counted how many bags of rice entered each home. They measured cloth by color and shine. At the well and outside the church, whispers floated like dust. "Did you see her basket?" one woman murmured. "Small," another replied, clicking her tongue. "Too small for Christmas." Judgment moved quietly, dressed as concern, but its heart was hard. In the widow's house, there was no noise of boasting. She washed her hands carefully and rinsed the rice again and again, even though the grains were few. She spread them on a clean cloth to dry, as her mother had taught her. Her children watched, sitting still. "This rice is not much," the widow said softly, "but it must be clean." "Will it be enough?" her eldest asked. "It will be honest," she replied, tying the cloth gently. Her words settled like calm water. Outside, kindness ran slower than gossip. People spoke in corners, behind doors, under breath. "Why should they cook rice at all?" someone said. "Christmas is for those who can afford it," another laughed. Church member shook her head. "Let them eat quietly. Celebration is heavy for the poor." The words traveled fast, faster than truth, faster than mercy. Soon, pride began to speak boldly. It questioned joy itself. It asked who was allowed to laugh, who was allowed to cook, who was allowed to celebrate. Some believed that poverty should lower the head and close the pot. That joy belonged to those with full stores and loud voices. The widow heard none of it directly, but the air around her house felt tight, as if something unseen was pressing close. As the rice was poured into the pot, the widow paused. The steam rose slowly, carrying more than heat. It carried hope. It carried fear. It carried watchful silence. The pot seemed heavier than it should be, as if it remembered every hand that would reach for it, every heart behind those hands. The children grew quiet, sensing it too. No one laughed. Even the fire crackled softly, as if listening. That evening, elders sat beneath the old tree near the church, their voices low but firm. One cleared his throat. "Food cooked with a crooked heart feeds sorrow," he said. Another nodded. "Pride can poison even the richest pot." A younger man shrugged. "Those are old sayings." The elder looked at him steadily. "Old does not mean dead." Their words drifted into the night, ignored by many, remembered by a few. And above the widow's small fire, the rice continued to cook, holding every intention placed near it, waiting for the day it would speak. The rice sat quietly in the pot as the fire breathed beneath it. It did not speak, yet it listened. It heard laughter mixed with judgment. It felt hands that trembled with honesty and others that moved with pride. Elders said food remembers the spirit of those who touch it, and this rice held every intention like a woven basket holds grain. Each white grain waited, patient and still, carrying the weight of what was coming. No one in the village sensed it yet. No one knew that this rice was no longer just food. It had become a witness. If they had known, they might have washed their hands differently. They might have lowered their voices. They might have softened their hearts. But people rarely fear what they cannot see, and so the village moved forward, laughing and competing, blind to the lesson waiting at the bottom of the pot. As Christmas drew near, joy slowly lost its quiet nature. What once was simple celebration turned into a contest. Songs were sung louder. Pots were placed closer to the road so passers-by could see inside. Women compared ingredients at the market, and men boasted near the palm wine stand. "Have you seen my rice?" one man asked proudly. "It is enough to feed half the church," another replied, smiling wide. Faith still spoke, but pride shouted. Soon, hearts were forgotten. Only pots mattered. In compound after compound, people leaned over fires, not to check if the rice was cooked well, but to see if it looked impressive. "Yours is small," a neighbor said with a light laugh. "It is what I have," came the quiet reply. "Christmas deserves more," the neighbor answered, shaking her head. No one asked how the rice was earned. No one asked if it was shared with love. Size became proof of goodness. Rich smell became evidence of worth. The poor felt their joy shrinking, even before Christmas arrived. At the church, baskets were placed before the altar. Coins clinked loudly. Bags of rice were dropped with force so all could hear. "God sees your giving," the pastor said. Man smiled and whispered to his wife, "They will remember this." Some gave not because they cared, but because they wanted to be seen. Their generosity stood tall, but their compassion sat low. Applause followed them as they returned to their seats, heads held high. And somewhere, in a small house near the edge of the village, a modest pot continued to cook. The rice inside did not shine. It did not boast. It only listened, waited, and remembered, preparing to answer every heart exactly as it had been treated. The wealthy house began to shine brighter as Christmas drew closer. Its walls were washed again and again, even when they were already clean. Large pots were placed near the gate so everyone passing could see their size. Smoke rose proudly into the sky, thick and scented, announcing abundance before anyone asked. Drums were tested early. Meat was counted loudly. "Make sure the pot is full," the man of the house said. "People must see that we lack nothing." Servants hurried. Laughter echoed, but it did not invite, it warned. The feast grew larger, yet something else grew smaller. Neighbors who once shared stools now stood apart. Unity slowly slipped away, like water through open fingers. While that house filled with noise, another grew quieter. The widow's family was not told directly to stay away. No words pushed them out. Instead, conversations stopped when they approached. Plans were made without their names. At meetings, there was no space left beside anyone. "We will decide later," they were told gently, again and again. The children noticed first. "Mama, why does no one ask you any more?" She forced a smile. "People are busy," she said. But her eyes lowered. Respect was taken away softly, so softly that it almost felt deserved. Inside a nearby home lived a woman who had once shared everything with the widow. She was family by marriage, close enough to know their struggles. She had helped before, carrying water, sharing salt. But this year, her heart felt heavy in a new way. She watched others praise the rich. She listened as people laughed at small pots. Shame crept into her chest. "Am I nothing?" she asked herself. Her husband spoke carelessly one night. "Look at us," he said. "We help the poor, yet no one sees us." Those words found a place to rest. Envy knocked, and she opened the door. When the widow trusted her with the rice, it felt natural. "Please watch it for me," the widow said. "I must fetch firewood." "I will," the woman replied, touching the bowl. Her voice sounded kind. The rice sat there, white and clean, humble and honest. The woman stared at it for a long moment. Then she thought of the laughter at the big house. She thought of her own quiet corner. Slowly, she reached out. Just a handful. Just enough, she told herself. She mixed it with another bowl, telling her heart it was no crime. What she did seemed small. No one screamed. No drum stopped beating. Yet the earth felt it. Old laws shifted. Traditions older than names cracked like dry clay. Food meant for survival had been touched by envy. Rice meant for sharing had been weighed against pride. In that moment, something sacred was bent. That night, the woman could not sleep. "It was nothing," she whispered to herself. "They won't even notice." But her chest felt tight. When she closed her eyes, she saw the widow's calm face. She heard elders' voices from long ago. "Food carries spirit," they had said. She turned on her mat. "It was only rice," she insisted. Still, guilt breathed beside her, quiet but awake. Outside, the moon hung low, watching. In kitchens across the village, pots rested on embers. And in one small pot, rice that had been touched by both honesty and betrayal continued to cook, holding the truth patiently, waiting for the day it would no longer stay silent. The voices grew louder as the days slipped closer to Christmas. At the marketplace and near the school fence, young men spoke with bold confidence. "These old rules slow us down," one said, waving his hand. "Times have changed." Another laughed. "Ancestors cannot cook rice for us now. Education feeds the future, not stories." Some nodded, pleased by the sound of progress. They spoke as if the past were a broken pot, no longer useful, forgetting that it once fed them all. The elders listened without interrupting. Their hair was white, their backs curved, but their eyes were sharp. When they finally spoke, the crowd grew uneasy. "A child who forgets his shadow will stumble at noon," one elder said quietly. Another added, "The ancestors do not sleep because you close your eyes." A few people chuckled. "Old fears," someone muttered. But the elders felt it, a tightening in the air, like a drum pulled too hard. The village stood between two roads. On one side were churches and schools, teaching new ways to see the world. On the other side were stories told by firelight, lessons learned without books. "God is love," the pastor preached. "Discipline builds success," the teacher insisted. Yet outside, an old woman whispered to a child, "Respect feeds the soul." People were confused. Right and wrong no longer walked together. The village heart split quietly, without blood. In a poor kitchen at the edge of town, sacrifice took shape without witnesses. The widow opened a small calabash and stared inside. She sighed, then poured it out. It was oil she had saved for weeks. "Must we use it all?" her daughter asked softly. "Yes," she replied. "Christmas rice must be prepared with care." They cooked slowly, stirring gently, even though it meant hunger later. Dignity guided their hands. The children sat close to the pot, eyes wide. "Will it taste good?" one asked. "It will taste like love," the widow said. They imagined full plates, laughter, and belonging. Their dreams rested inside that pot, rising with the steam. That same evening, elders gathered again. They felt something wrong, something unseen pressing against their chests. "The village is walking with one foot in light, one in shadow," an elder murmured. "Let them talk," a younger man scoffed nearby. "Fear belongs to old bones." The elders fell silent, knowing warnings spoken too often become noise. That night, the sky changed. Clouds moved without wind. The moon hid behind thin mist. A sudden chill passed through the town, though the season was warm. Chickens refused to settle. Dogs whined without reason. People paused, uneasy. "It is nothing," they told themselves. But above every roof, the sky watched, heavy and still, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for Christmas morning to reveal what hearts had already chosen. The chickens refused to sleep on their usual roosts. They clucked nervously and flapped wings at shadows no one else saw. Goats stamped their hooves, uneasy in the small pens. Even the dogs, who often slept under fires, whimpered softly as if hearing words from far above. Villagers noticed in passing but shook their heads. "The animals are restless," someone said. "Just the wind," another replied. Yet elders watched quietly, their eyes heavy with knowledge. Nature had a memory, they whispered. It remembered the hands that took what was not theirs, the hearts that had grown proud, and the intentions tucked deep in shadows. A low crack echoed from a kitchen near the edge of town. A pot, old but well used, split down the middle without fire touching it. The widow's daughter jumped back. "Mama!" she cried. The widow knelt, touching the broken vessel. "Even the earth speaks," she whispered. "Every act carries weight." The rice inside that day, small and humble, trembled as if acknowledging the breach. What was prepared for sharing had been marked, and the signs were plain for those who could read them. Meanwhile, the village continued its preparations, unaware of the unseen judgment. Children ran through streets, laughing at games. Men loaded carts with cassava and yams. Women swept courtyards and decorated porches with palm leaves. All seemed normal, yet the air felt tighter, the sun brighter, and shadows deeper. The rice, still in its humble pot, waited. It had felt hands that betrayed, eyes that envied, and hearts that hoped. Greed settled quietly into its grains, patient and silent, holding every intention. Morning broke over the village like a drumbeat. The first light touched rooftops, the red earth, and the small clay paths winding between them. Doors opened. Voices rose in greeting and song. Smoke began to curl from every hearth. The excitement of Christmas moved like water through the streets, swift and unstoppable. No one noticed that the world itself held its breath, that truth had already awakened, ready to answer the hearts of those who would touch the rice that day. Paths began to fill as men, women, elders, and children converged toward the central square. Hands clasped, laughter rang, and drums accompanied every step. Elders walked slowly, eyes scanning the crowd, sensing the balance of the village. Children ran ahead, eager for celebration. Even in this moment of apparent unity, a subtle tension threaded through the gathering. The village moved as one body, unaware that beneath the smiles, every secret, every envy, every pride was about to be revealed, as patient and sharp as the rice waiting quietly in humble pots. Clay pots rattled as hands lifted their lids across the village. In homes, in courtyards, and even by the church steps, rice steamed and waited to be eaten. The smell of cooking mixed with the scent of palm leaves and smoke from fires. Children peeked eagerly, eyes wide. Adults smiled politely, but some looked to neighbors first, measuring reactions before they took their spoons. Each pot had become more than a meal, it was a test. Who had prepared it with care, who with pride, who with envy? Every serving was watched as though invisible eyes judged the hearts behind the grains. Laughter floated over the square. Songs rose from drums. Plates clinked. People greeted one another with cheer. Yet beneath the music and chatter, fate moved silently. It threaded through the smoke, it passed from hand to hand, and it whispered to every grain. No one could see it, and yet every soul present was already being weighed. Near the wealthy household, the first strange sign appeared. A spoon dipped into a steaming pot, and a sharp, sour smell rose. Guests recoiled. "Did you smell that?" a man asked, frowning. "It's the rice," whispered his wife. "Something is wrong." The smell spread, subtle but undeniable, turning excitement into unease. Moments later, a hush fell in another home. People began to clutch their stomachs, moaning softly. "I feel weak," said one of the proud hosts. "Drink water." "Sit down," a servant called. Even children looked on with wide eyes. The illness spread fastest where greed and pride had been closest to the pots. Hands that had measured generosity for attention now trembled in discomfort. The crowd outside the church noticed a sudden collapse. A man, head held high just moments before, fell to the ground. Drums stopped abruptly. The village froze, fear rippling like a cold wind. Mothers clutched children. Elders leaned on canes, whispering warnings. Eyes darted from house to house. Where once there had been applause for abundance, now there was shame. The household meant to impress with lavish dishes sat quiet, heads lowered, guests whispering about the strange turn of events. The laughter had vanished, replaced with murmurs of caution and glances toward the humble homes. Pride had been punished, and the community understood, without words, that food carries more than flavor, it carries truth. A heavy silence fell over the village as people watched the events unfold. No one spoke the accusations aloud, yet trembling hands, lowered heads, and quick glances betrayed every hidden wrongdoing. The air felt thick with unspoken guilt, and even those who had not touched the rice sensed it. Children stopped laughing mid-play, sensing a shift in the wind. Adults stiffened, unsure of where to look, yet unable to turn away. In every heart, the weight of conscience walked naked, impossible to hide beneath robes of pride or piles of food. The woman who had touched the widow's rice sat apart, hands shaking, sweat on her brow. I thought it was nothing," she whispered to herself. Her eyes darted to the crowd, seeing not anger but the quiet mirror of her own shame. Each grain she had moved seemed to burn her fingers from afar. The village could feel it, the subtle trembling of one soul, small yet undeniable, as guilt pressed down and would not let her go. The elders leaned on their canes, faces calm and unreadable. They said nothing, letting the invisible hand of justice weave through the crowd. "Truth speaks," one murmured. "It does not need our voice." Others nodded, eyes on the unfolding scene. Every glance, every collapse, every shiver in the pot of rice carried its own lesson. Justice was walking freely, and the old laws were remembered without uttering a single word. Meanwhile, the widow's small pot sat quietly on its hearth. Steam curled gently from its surface, carrying the soft scent of humility and care. Children gathered around, eyes bright with trust. One spoonful lifted, and a hush of calm spread through the family. The air felt lighter. The pot's simplicity seemed to wash over the room like a soft rain, contrasting sharply with the chaos that had overtaken the wealthy and proud elsewhere. As the rice was shared with care, warmth traveled through the hands that gave it. Mothers felt relief, fathers relaxed, and children laughed softly, comforted by the gentle rhythm of spoons in bowls. Hearts that had been anxious or lonely seemed to fill with a quiet joy. Love, offered freely, became a shield, a balm, and a blessing. No trumpet, no drum, no public praise was needed. The heart understood its own gift. Across the square, eyes fell from the proud household. Heads once held high now bowed. Laughter that had mocked the poor now faltered. The wealth that had spoken loudest in fine clothes, large pots, and glittering firewood seemed suddenly hollow. Respect slipped silently from hands that had grasped it tightly, leaving embarrassment and reflection in its place. Pride had crumbled like dry clay under the weight of its own making. The village stirred with understanding. Whispers spread from courtyard to kitchen to church steps. Status, wealth, and appearance could not sway what had been set in motion. Moral law, ancient and patient, did not bend to applause, gold, or lofty titles. People began to murmur to one another, not in accusation, but in recognition. Truth would always find the heart, and justice did not bow. The lesson of the rice, humble yet unyielding, had spoken clearly to all. The steam from the small pots curled upward like invisible fingers, carrying a message no voice could deliver. Each grain of rice, humble and white, seemed alive with knowledge. It had felt the hands that touched it, the hearts that prepared it, the eyes that watched it. Where generosity had guided it, warmth and calm radiated. Where greed and pride had guided it, discomfort, shame, and illness quietly settled. The rice had become a voice, speaking louder than whispers, louder than drums, louder than any argument. No one could silence it. No one could deny its judgment. Children of the poor family laughed softly as they ate, eyes wide with the simple joy of being fed with love. The widow's small pot had brought peace to their hearts, and the calm radiated outward. Across the village, those who had acted with deceit and pride felt the weight of their intentions. Faces paled. Hands trembled. Even the strongest tried to smile, but the rice did not lie, and its verdict was clear. Blessing finds the pure, judgment finds the crooked. The village fell into silence where laughter had once ruled. The drums ceased. Songs halted. No one dared speak too loudly, as if the wind itself carried the lesson in its whispers. People glanced at one another with lowered eyes, seeing themselves reflected in every act of envy, pride, or neglect. Children clung to their parents, sensing the seriousness of the day without needing words to explain it. Neighbors recalled how judgment had replaced kindness over the past weeks. Eyes that had measured pots, plates, and appearances now held sorrow. "We forgot the old ways," one woman murmured. "We looked at wealth and not hearts." Another nodded quietly. "We counted others' faults, not our own." The collective weight of realization settled over the village, heavy yet necessary. The elders, who had watched in silence from the first signs, stepped forward. Their voices, calm and steady, guided the trembling village back toward wisdom. "Remember," an elder said, leaning on his cane, "that the heart is tested in silence, not applause. That food shared with pride feeds nothing but sorrow. That the smallest act of honesty carries more power than mountains of gold." Others gathered around, touching the shoulders of the young and pointing to the humble kitchens, weaving the broken moral threads into a tapestry of memory. Slowly, the village began to breathe again. The lesson had been harsh but just. The rice had spoken truth where words failed, and in its voice, the people understood. Intentions mattered more than appearances, honesty outweighed deceit, and moral law, ancient and patient, would always find its way. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light over clay roofs and earthen paths, the community remained quiet, thoughtful, and changed, carrying forward the lesson of a Christmas where truth had sat firmly where joy once played. The elders gathered at the center of the village, leaning on carved staffs worn smooth by generations. Their voices, calm but carrying weight, broke the silence. "The ancestors speak even when no drum beats," one said, "and they remember each act of pride and deceit. Wealth cannot hide guilt, and status cannot silence truth." The villagers listened, heads bowed, feeling the weight of invisible eyes that had watched them long before their own mothers had spoken. Every whispered excuse seemed fragile against the echo of ancestral wisdom. The betrayer stepped forward, shoulders trembling under the weight of the village gaze. Once confident, now stripped of pretense, they avoided meeting anyone's eyes. I have done wrong," they whispered, voice hoarse. "I touched what was not mine, and pride blinded me." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but there was no anger yet, only the gravity of acknowledgement. Humility hung heavy in the air, stronger than any shield of wealth or influence. Quietly, the betrayer began to make amends. Grain by grain, the stolen rice was returned to the widow's pot, hands shaking but sincere. "Forgive me," they said softly, watching the small family's cautious eyes. The act was deliberate, painstaking, a slow rebuilding of trust that could not be rushed. Each grain placed back seemed to lighten the burden on the soul of the guilty, even as the villagers observed in awe. Later, a public apology followed. "I sought pride, and I brought shame," the voice rang out across the courtyard. "To you, to the ancestors, to the village, I offer my words as truth and my hands in service." Faces that had once measured worth by applause now saw the cost of confession. Pride fell heavier than any weight of gold, yet lighter than the soul unburdened of deceit. The hands that had harmed were now busy serving the hungry, ladling food into small bowls, carrying warmth where previously there had been envy. Children smiled shyly as rice filled their plates, and the widow nodded slowly, accepting the restitution as more than food. It was a sign that balance could return. Through action, humility, and service, the village witnessed redemption, and the moral law of the ancestors, patient and unyielding, found its living expression once more. The village sat in a hush that was heavier than any drumbeat. Forgiveness did not come quickly. It lingered in the air, stubborn and cautious, like a river hesitant to leave its bed. Some villagers whispered among themselves, debating whether the wronged could truly accept restitution. "Will she ever look at him again?" one woman asked quietly. The widow, stooped from years of struggle, lifted her eyes slowly. "It is not easy," she said softly, "but the heart that opens can heal the land as well as itself." Her voice carried, gentle yet unyielding, reminding the crowd that mercy asks patience. Respect replaced pity as the small household moved through the village. Neighbors no longer glanced at them with softened eyes. Instead, they bowed their heads and offered nods of understanding. "We see you as you are," an elder said, "not as the shadow of poverty." Children skipped past without hesitation, their laughter ringing true, and the family felt the warmth of dignity that no coins could ever purchase. In every gesture, the village learned that true value was measured by character, not coin. Those who once wore pride as a garment now bowed their heads. Wealthy hands rested quietly in laps, eyes cast down, recognizing that gold cannot command respect where honesty and courage stand. "I have measured riches too often and mercy too little," a once proud woman whispered to herself. The realization sank in, bitter and clear, that arrogance had been heavier than the food on their table. The children gathered close to the widow's humble pot, staring wide-eyed at the steaming rice. "This is what Christmas truly is," one whispered. "Not the feast, but the love that fills it." Tiny hands reached for the bowls, and joy returned quietly, not in abundance, but in the shared warmth of care. Every spoonful was a lesson in generosity, every smile a proof that happiness grows where hearts are full. The pot, once the stage of envy and deceit, now rested in the corner, washed and polished. It reflected the sun faintly through the doorway, clean not merely in appearance but in meaning. Steam curled gently from it, rising like a prayer carried to the ancestors above. The elders circled and spoke once more, their voices soft yet firm. "Remember this day, not for shame, not for wealth, but for truth. What greed cooks feeds sorrow. What love shares feeds generations." Evening fell. A single pot sat on dying embers under the fading sky, its quiet warmth lingering like memory. Steam rose in ribbons, carrying hope and prayer forward, promising that the lesson would not die with the sun. Around the fire, children sat wide-eyed, leaning close to elders who whispered the tale once more. The story passed from mouth to ear, from heart to heart, a living guide for the next generation, reminding all that the rice of Christmas is not only food, it is a mirror of the soul, a measure of the heart, and a voice no one can silence.